Welcome back. In Chapter 14, we witness Savage's heart-wrenching reunion with his dying mother, Linda. The clash between his raw emotions and this sanitized world sets a poignant stage. As we move into Chapters 15 and 16, what choices will the Savage make when confronted with the full weight of this brave new world's values? Let's dive in and find out. Chapter 15. The menial staff of the Park Lane Hospital for the Dying consisted of 162 deltas divided into two Bokanovsky groups of 84 red-headed female and 78 dark dolichocephalic male twins, respectively. At 6, when their working day was over, the two groups assembled in the vestibule of the hospital and were served by the deputy sub-bursar with their soma ration. From the lift, the Savage stepped out into the midst of them, but his mind was elsewhere with death, with his grief, and his remorse. Mechanically, without consciousness of what he was doing, he began to shoulder his way through the crowd. "Who are you pushing? Where do you think you're going?" High, low, from a multitude of separate throats, only two voices squeaked or growled. Repeated indefinitely, as though by a train of mirrors, two faces, one a hairless and freckled moon haloed in orange, the other a thin, beaked bird mask, stubbly with 2 days' beard, turned angrily towards him. Their words and, in his ribs, the sharp nudging of elbows broke through his unawareness. He woke once more to external reality, looked round him, knew what he saw, knew it, with a sinking sense of horror and disgust for the recurrent delirium of his days and nights, the nightmare of swarming indistinguishable sameness. Twins. Twins. Like maggots, they had swarmed defilingly over the mystery of Linda's death. Maggots again, but larger. Full-grown, they now crawled across his grief and his repentance. He halted, and with bewildered and horrified eyes, stared round him at the khaki mob, in the midst of which, overtopping it by a full head, he stood. "How many goodly creatures are there here?" The singing words mocked him derisively. "How beauteous mankind is! O brave new world!" "Soma distribution!" shouted a loud voice. "In good order, please! Hurry up there!" A door had been opened, a table and chair carried into the vestibule. The voice was that of a jaunty young alpha who had entered carrying a black iron cash box. A murmur of satisfaction went up from the expectant twins. They forgot all about the Savage. Their attention was now focused on the black cash box, which the young man had placed on the table and was now in process of unlocking. The lid was lifted. "Oh, oh!" said all the 162 simultaneously, as though they were looking at fireworks. The young man took out a handful of tiny pillboxes. "Now," he said peremptorily, "step forward, please. One at a time, and no shoving." One at a time, with no shoving, the twins stepped forward. First 2 males, then a female, then another male, then 3 females, then. The Savage stood looking on. "O brave new world! O brave new world!" In his mind, the singing words seemed to change their tone. They had mocked him through his misery and remorse, mocked him with how hideous a note of cynical derision. Fiendishly laughing, they had insisted on the low squalor, the nauseous ugliness of the nightmare. Now, suddenly, they trumpeted a call to arms. "O brave new world!" Miranda was proclaiming the possibility of loveliness, the possibility of transforming even the nightmare into something fine and noble. "O brave new world!" It was a challenge, a command. "No shoving there now!" shouted the deputy sub-bursar in a fury. He slammed down the lid of his cash box. "I shall stop the distribution unless I have good behavior." The deltas muttered, jostled one another a little, and then were still. The threat had been effective. Deprivation of soma appalling thought. "That's better," said the young man, and reopened his cash box. Linda had been a slave. Linda had died. Others should live in freedom, and the world be made beautiful. A reparation, a duty. And suddenly, it was luminously clear to the Savage what he must do. It was as though a shutter had been opened, a curtain drawn back. "Now!" said the deputy sub-bursar. Another khaki female stepped forward. "Stop!" called the Savage in a loud and ringing voice. "Stop!" He pushed his way to the table. The Deltas stared at him with astonishment. "Ford!" said the deputy sub-bursar below his breath. "It's the Savage!" He felt scared. "Listen, I beg of you!" cried the Savage earnestly. "Lend me your ears!" He had never spoken in public before and found it very difficult to express what he wanted to say. "Don't take that horrible stuff! It's poison! It's poison!" "I say, Mr. Savage," said the deputy sub-bursar, smiling propitiatingly. "Would you mind letting me poison to soul as well as body?" "Yes, but let me get on with my distribution, won't you? There's a good fellow." With the cautious tenderness of one who strokes a notoriously vicious animal, he patted the Savage's arm. "Just let me—" "Never!" cried the Savage. "But look here, old man. Throw it all away, that horrible poison." The words, "throw it all away," pierced through the enfolding layers of incomprehension to the quick of the Delta's consciousness. An angry murmur went up from the crowd. "I come to bring you freedom," said the Savage, turning back towards the twins. "I come—" The deputy sub-bursar heard no more. He had slipped out of the vestibule and was looking up a number in the telephone book. "Not in his own rooms," Bernard summed up. "Not in mine, not in yours. Not at the Aphroditeum, not at the center or the college. Where can he have got to?" Helmholtz shrugged his shoulders. They had come back from their work expecting to find the Savage waiting for them at one or other of the usual meeting places, and there was no sign of the fellow, which was annoying, as they had meant to nip across to Biarritz in Helmholtz's four-seater sporticopter. They'd be late for dinner if he didn't come soon. "We'll give him 5 more minutes," said Helmholtz. "If he doesn't turn up by then, we'll—" The ringing of the telephone bell interrupted him. He picked up the receiver. "Hello. Speaking." Then, after a long interval of listening, "Ford in Flivver," he swore. "I'll come at once." "What is it?" Bernard asked. "A fellow I know at the Park Lane Hospital," said Helmholtz. "The Savage is there. Seems to have gone mad. Anyhow, it's urgent. Will you come with me?" Together they hurried along the corridor to the lifts. "But do you like being slaves?" the Savage was saying as they entered the hospital. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with ardor and indignation. "Do you like being babies?" "Yes, babies, mewling and puking," he added, exasperated by their bestial stupidity into throwing insults at those he had come to save. The insults bounced off their carapace of thick stupidity. They stared at him with a blank expression of dull and sullen resentment in their eyes. "Yes, puking!" he fairly shouted. Grief and remorse, compassion and duty all were forgotten now, and, as it were, absorbed into an intense, overpowering hatred of these less-than-human monsters. "Don't you want to be free and men? Don't you even understand what manhood and freedom are?" Rage was making him fluent. The words came easily, in a rush. "Don't you?" he repeated, but got no answer to his question. "Very well, then," he went on grimly. "I'll teach you. I'll make you be free whether you want to or not." And pushing open a window that looked onto the inner court of the hospital, he began to throw the little pillboxes of soma tablets in handfuls out into the area. For a moment, the khaki mob was silent, petrified at the spectacle of this wanton sacrilege, with amazement and horror. "He's mad," whispered Bernard, staring with wide-open eyes. "They'll kill him! They'll—" A great shout suddenly went up from the mob. A wave of movement drove it menacingly towards the Savage. "Ford, help him!" said Bernard, and averted his eyes. "Ford helps those who help themselves." And with a laugh, actually a laugh of exultation, Helmholtz Watson pushed his way through the crowd. "Free! Free!" the Savage shouted, and with one hand continued to throw the soma into the area, while with the other he punched the indistinguishable faces of his assailants. "Free!" And suddenly there was Helmholtz at his side. Good old Helmholtz, also punching, men at last, and in the interval also throwing the poison out by handfuls through the open window. "Yes, men, men!" And there was no more poison left. He picked up the cash box and showed them its black emptiness. "You're free! Howling, the Deltas charged with a redoubled fury, hesitant on the fringes of the battle. "They're done for," said Bernard, and, urged by a sudden impulse, ran forward to help them. Then thought better of it and halted. Then, ashamed, stepped forward again. Then again thought better of it, and was standing in an agony of humiliated indecision, thinking that they might be killed if he didn't help them, and that he might be killed if he did, when, "Ford be praised!" Oh, goggle-eyed and swine-snouted in their gas masks, in ran the police. Bernard dashed to meet them. He waved his arms, and it was action. He was doing something. He shouted, "Help!" several times, more and more loudly, so as to give himself the illusion of helping. "Help! Help! Help!" The policemen pushed him out of the way and got on with their work. 3 men with spraying machines buckled to their shoulders, pumped thick clouds of soma vapor into the air. 2 more were busy round the portable synthetic music box. Carrying water pistols charged with a powerful anesthetic, 4 others had pushed their way into the crowd and were methodically laying out, squirt by squirt, the more ferocious of the fighters. "Quick, quick!" yelled Bernard. "They'll be killed if you don't hurry! They'll— oh!" Annoyed by his chatter, one of the policemen had given him a shot from his water pistol. Bernard stood for a second or two, wobbling unsteadily on legs that seemed to have lost their bones, their tendons, their muscles, to have become mere sticks of jelly, and at last, not even jelly water. He tumbled in a heap on the floor. Suddenly, from out of the synthetic music box, a voice began to speak. The voice of reason, the voice of good feeling. The soundtrack roll was unwinding itself in synthetic anti-riot speech number 2. Medium strength. Straight from the depths of a non-existent heart, my friends," said the voice so pathetically, with a note of such infinitely tender reproach that, behind their gas masks, even the policemen's eyes were momentarily dimmed with TRs. "What is the meaning of this? Why aren't you all being happy and good together? Happy and good," the voice repeated. "At peace, at peace." It trembled, sank into a whisper, and momentarily expired. "Oh, I do want you to be happy," it began, with a yearning earnestness. "I do so want you to be good. Please, please be good. And—" 2 minutes later, the voice and the soma vapor had produced their effect. In tears, the Deltas were kissing and hugging one another, 6 twins at a time, in a comprehensive embrace. Even Helmholtz and the Savage were almost crying. A fresh supply of pillboxes was brought in from the bursary. A new distribution was hastily made and, to the sound of the voice's requie affectionate baritone valedictions, the twins dispersed, blubbering as though their hearts would break. "Goodbye, my dearest, dearest friends, Ford keep you. Goodbye, my dearest, dearest friends, Ford keep you. Goodbye, my dearest, dearest." When the last of the Deltas had gone, the policeman switched off the current. The angelic voice fell silent. "Will you come quietly?" asked the sergeant. "Or must we anesthetize?" He pointed his water pistol menacingly. "Oh, we'll come quietly," the Savage answered, dabbing alternately a cut lip, a scratched neck, and a bitten left hand. Still keeping his handkerchief to his bleeding nose, Helmholtz nodded in confirmation. Awake and having recovered the use of his legs, Bernard had chosen this moment to move as inconspicuously as he could towards the door. "Hi, you there!" called the sergeant, and a swine-masked policeman hurried across the room and laid a hand on the young man's shoulder. Bernard turned with an expression of indignant innocence. Escaping? He hadn't dreamed of such a thing. "Though what on earth you want me for," he said to the sergeant, "I really can't imagine. You're a friend of the prisoners, aren't you?" "Well," said Bernard, and hesitated. No, he really couldn't deny it. "Why shouldn't I be?" he asked. "Come on then," said the sergeant, and led the way towards the door and the waiting police car. Chapter 16, the room into which the 3 were ushered, was the controller's study. "His Fordship will be down in a moment." The Gamma butler left them to themselves. Helmholtz laughed aloud. "It's more like a caffeine solution party than a trial," he said, and let himself fall into the most luxurious of the pneumatic armchairs. "Cheer up, Bernard," he added, catching sight of his friend's green, unhappy face. But Bernard would not be cheered. Without answering, without even looking at Helmholtz, he went and sat down on the most uncomfortable chair in the room, carefully chosen in the obscure hope of somehow deprecating the wrath of the higher powers. The savage, meanwhile, wandered restlessly round the room, peering with a vague, superficial inquisitiveness at the books in the shelves, at the sound, track rolls and reading machine bobbins in their numbered pigeonholes. On the table under the window lay a massive volume bound in limp black leather surrogate and stamped with large golden T's. He picked it up and opened it. My Life and Work, by R. Ford. The book had been published at Detroit by the Society for the Propagation of Fordian Knowledge. Idly he turned the pages, read a sentence here, a paragraph there, and had just come to the conclusion that the book didn't interest him when the door opened and the resident world controller for Western Europe walked briskly into the room. Mustapha Mond shook hands with all three of them, but it was to the savage that he addressed himself. So you don't much like civilization, Mr. Savage, he said. The savage looked at him. He had been prepared to lie, to bluster, to remain sullenly unresponsive, but reassured by the good-humored intelligence of the controller's face, he decided to tell the truth, straightforwardly. No. He shook his head. Bernard started and looked horrified. What would the controller think? To be labeled as the friend of a man who said that he didn't like civilization, said it openly, and of all people, to the controller, it was terrible. But John, he began. A look from Mustapha Mond reduced him to an abject silence. Of course, the savage went on to admit. There are some very nice things. All that music in the air, for instance. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about my ears, and sometimes voices. The savage's face lit up with a sudden pleasure. Have you read it too? He asked. I thought nobody knew about that book here in England. Almost nobody. I'm one of the very few. It's prohibited, you see. But as I make the laws here, I can also break them. With impunity, Mr. Marx, he added, turning to Bernard. Which I'm afraid you can't do. Bernard sank into a yet more hopeless misery. But why is it prohibited? Asked the savage. In the excitement of meeting a man who had read Shakespeare, he had momentarily forgotten everything else. The controller shrugged his shoulders. Because it's old. That's the chief reason. We haven't any use for old things here. Even when they're beautiful? Particularly when they're beautiful. Beauty's attractive, and we don't want people to be attracted by old things. We want them to like the new ones. But the new ones are so stupid and horrible. Those plays where there's nothing but helicopters flying about and you feel the people kissing. He made a grimace. Goats and monkeys. Only in Othello's word could he find an adequate vehicle for his contempt and hatred. Nice tame animals, anyhow, the controller murmured parenthetically. Why don't you let them see Othello instead? I've told you, it's old. Besides, they couldn't understand it. Yes, that was true. He remembered how Helmholtz had laughed at Romeo and Juliet. Well then, he said, after a pause, something new that's like Othello, and that they could understand. That's what we've all been wanting to write, said Helmholtz, breaking a long silence. And it's what you never will write, said the controller. Because if it were really like Othello, nobody could understand it, however new it might be. And if we're new, it couldn't possibly be like Othello. Why not? Yes, why not? Helmholtz repeated. He too was forgetting the unpleasant realities of the situation. Green with anxiety and apprehension, only Bernard remembered them. The others ignored him. Why not? Because our world is not the same as Othello's world. You can't make flivvers without steel, and you can't make tragedies without social instability. The world's stable now. People are happy. They get what they want, and they never want what they can't get. They're well off. They're safe. They're never ill. They're not afraid of death. They're blissfully ignorant of passion and old age. They're plagued with no mothers or fathers. They've got no wives or children or lovers to feel strongly about. They're so conditioned that they practically can't help behaving as they ought to behave. And if anything should go wrong, there's Soma. which you go and chuck out of the window in the name of liberty, Mr. Savage. Liberty! He laughed. Expecting deltas to know what liberty is, and now expecting them to understand Othello. My good boy. The Savage was silent for a little. All the same, he insisted obstinately, Othello's good, Othello's better than those feelies. Of course it is, the controller agreed. But that's the price we have to pay for stability. You've got to choose between happiness and what people used to call high art. We've sacrificed the high art. We have the feelies and the scent organ instead. But they don't mean anything. They mean themselves. They mean a lot of agreeable sensations to the audienza. But they're told by an idiot. The controller laughed. You're not being very polite to your friend, Mr. Watson, one of our most distinguished emotional engineers. But he's right, said Helmholtz gloomily. Because it is idiotic. Writing when there's nothing to say. Precisely. But that requires the most enormous ingenuity. You're making frivovers out of the absolute minimum of steelworks of art out of practically nothing but pure sensation. The Savage shook his head. It all seems to me quite horrible. Of course it does. Actual happiness always looks pretty squalid in comparison with the overcompensations for misery. And of course, stability isn't nearly so spectacular as instability. And being contented has none of the glamour of a good fight against misfortune, none of the picturesqueness of a struggle with temptation or a fatal overthrow by passion or doubt. Happiness is never grand. I suppose not, said the Savage after a silence. But need it be quite so bad as those twins? He passed his hand over his eyes, as though he were trying to wipe away the remembered image of those long rows of identical midgets at the assembling tables. Those queued-up twin herds at the entrance to the Brentford monorail station. Those human maggots swarming round Linda's bed of death. The endlessly repeated face of his assailants. He looked at his bandaged left hand and shuddered. Horrible! But how useful! I see you don't like our Bokanovsky groups, but I assure you they're the foundation on which everything else is built. They're the gyroscope that stabilizes the rocket plane of state on its unswerving course. The deep voice thrillingly vibrated. The gesticulating hand implied all space and the onrush of the irresistible machine. Mustapha Mond's oratory was almost up to synthetic standards. I was wondering, said the Savage, why you had them at all, seeing that you can get whatever you want out of those bottles. Why don't you make everybody an Alpha Double Plus while you're about it? Mustapha Mond laughed. Because we have no wish to have our throats cut, he answered. We believe in happiness and stability. A society of alphas couldn't fail to be unstable and miserable. Imagine a factory staffed by alphas, that is to say by separate and unrelated individuals of good heredity and condition so as to be capable, within limits, of making a free choice and assuming responsibilities. Imagine it, he repeated. The Savage tried to imagine it, not very successfully. It's an absurdity. An alpha-decanted, alpha-conditioned man would go mad if he had to do epsilon semi-moron work go mad or start smashing things up. Alphas can be completely socialized, but only on condition that you make them do alpha work. Only an epsilon can be expected to make epsilon sacrifices, for the good reason that for him, they aren't sacrifices. They're the line of least resistance. His conditioning has laid down rails along which he's got to run. He can't help himself. He's foredoomed. Even after decanting, he's still inside a bottle, an invisible bottle of infantile and embryonic fixations. Each one of us, of course, the controller meditatively continued, goes through life inside a bottle. But if we happen to be alphas, our bottles are, relatively speaking, enormous. We should suffer acutely if we were confined in a narrower space. You cannot pour upper caste champagne surrogate into lower caste bottles. It's obvious theoretically, but it has also been proved in actual practice. The result of the Cyprus experiment was convincing. What was that? Asked the Savage. Mustapha Mond smiled. Well, you can call it an experiment in rebottling if you like. It began in AF 473. The controllers had the island of Cyprus cleared of all its existing inhabitants and recolonized with a specially prepared batch of 22,000 alphas. All agricultural and industrial equipment was handed over to them, and they were left to manage their own affairs. The result exactly fulfilled all the theoretical predictions. The land wasn't properly worked. There were strikes in all the factories. The laws were set at naught, orders disobeyed. All the people detailed for a spell of low-grade work were perpetually intriguing for high-grade jobs, and all the people with high-grade jobs were counter-intriguing at all costs to stay where they were. Within 6 years, they were having a first-class civil war. When 19 out of the 22,000 had been killed, the survivors unanimously petitioned the world controllers to resume the government of the island, which they did. And that was the end of the only society of alphas that the world has ever seen. The savage sighed profoundly. The optimum population, said Mustapha Mond, is modeled on the iceberg 8/9 below the waterline, 1/9 above. And they're happy below the waterline? Happier than above it. Happier than your friend here, for example. He pointed. In spite of that awful work? Awful? They don't find it so. On the contrary, they like it. It's light. It's childishly simple. No strain on the mind or the muscles. 7.5 hours of mild, exhausting labor. And then the soma ration and games and unrestricted copulation and the feelies. What more can they ask for? True, he added. They might ask for shorter hours. And of course we could give them shorter hours. Technically, it would be perfectly simple to reduce all lower caste working hours to 3 or 4 a day. But would they be any the happier for that? No, they wouldn't. The experiment was tried, more than a century and a half ago. The whole of Ireland was put on to the 4-hour day. What was the result? Unrest and a large increase in the consumption of soma. That was all. Those 3.5 hours of extra leisure were so far from being a source of happiness that people felt constrained to take a holiday from them. The inventions office is stuffed with plans for labor-saving processes. Thousands of them. Mustapha Mond made a lavish gesture. And why don't we put them into execution? For the sake of the laborers. It would be sheer cruelty to afflict them with excessive leisure. It's the same with agriculture. We could synthesize every morsel of food if we wanted to, but we don't. We prefer to keep 1/3 of the population on the land, for their own sakes, because it takes longer to get food out of the land than out of a factory. Besides, we have our stability to think of. We don't want to change. Every change is a menace to stability. That's another reason why we're so chary of applying new inventions. Every discovery in pure science is potentially subversive. Even science must sometimes be treated as a possible enemy. Yes, even science. Science? The savage frowned. He knew the word, but what it exactly signified he could not say. Shakespeare and the old men of the Pueblo had never mentioned science, and from Linda he had only gathered the vaguest hints. Science was something you made helicopters with, something that caused you to laugh at the corn dances, something that prevented you from being wrinkle-clad and losing your teeth. He made a desperate effort to take the controller's meaning. Yes, Mustapha Mond was saying. That's another item in the cost of stability. It isn't only art that's incompatible with happiness, it's also science. Science is dangerous. We have to keep it most carefully chained and muzzled. What? Said Helmholtz in astonishment. But we're always saying that science is everything. It's a hypnopedic platitude. 3 times a week between 13 and 17, put in Bamard. And all the science propaganda we do at the college. Yes, but what sort of science? Asked Mustapha Mond sarcastically. You've had no scientific training, so you can't judge. I was a pretty good physicist in my time. Too good enough to realize that all our science is just a cookery book, with an orthodox theory of cooking that nobody's allowed to question, and a list of recipes that mustn't be added to except by special permission from the head cook. I'm the head cook now. But I was an inquisitive young scullion once. I started doing a bit of cooking on my own. Unorthodox cooking, illicit cooking. A bit of real science, in fact. He was silent. What happened? Asked Helmholtz Watson. The controller sighed. Very nearly what's going to happen to you young men. I was on the point of being sent to an island. The words galvanized Bernard into violent and unseemly activity. Send me to an island? He jumped up, ran across the room, and stood gesticulating in front of the controller. "You can't send me. I haven't done anything. LT was the others. I swear it was the others." He pointed accusingly to Helmholtz and the Savage. "Oh, please don't send me to Iceland. I promise I'll do what I ought to do. Give me another chance. Please, give me another chance." The tears began to flow. "I tell you, it's their fault," he sobbed. "And not to Iceland. Oh, please, your Ford ship, please." And in a paroxysm of objection, he threw himself on his knees before the controller. Mustapha Mond tried to make him get up, but Bernard persisted in his groveling. The stream of words poured out inexhaustibly. In the end, the controller had to ring for his fourth secretary. "Bring 3 men," he ordered, "and take Mr. Marks into a bedroom. Give him a good soma vaporization and then put him to bed and leave him." The fourth secretary went out and returned with 3 green-uniformed twin footmen, still shouting and sobbing. Bernard was carried out. "One would think he was going to have his throat cut," said the controller as the door closed. Whereas, if he had the smallest sense, he'd understand that his punishment is really a reward. He's being sent to an island. That's to say, he's being sent to a place where he'll meet the most interesting set of men and women to be found anywhere in the world. All the people who, for one reason or another, have got too self-consciously individual to fit into community life. All the people who aren't satisfied with orthodoxy, who've got independent ideas of their own. Everyone, in a word, who's anyone. I almost envy you, Mr. Watson. Helmholtz laughed. Then why aren't you on an island yourself? Because finally, I preferred this, the controller answered. I was given the choice to be sent to an island where I could have got on with my pure science, or to be taken on to the Controller's Council with the prospect of succeeding in due course to an actual controllership. I chose this and let the science go. After a little silence, sometimes, he added, I rather regret the science. Happiness is a hard master, particularly other people's happiness. A much harder master, if one isn't conditioned to accept it unquestioningly, than truth. He sighed, fell silent again, then continued in a brisker tone. Well, duty's duty. One can't consult one's own preference. I'm interested in truth. I like science. But truth's a menace. Science is a public danger. As dangerous as it's been beneficent. It has given us the stablest equilibrium in history. China's was hopelessly insecure by comparison. Even the primitive matriarchies weren't steadier than we are. Thanks'll repeat to science. But we can't allow science to undo its own good work. That's why we so carefully limit the scope of its researches. That's why I almost got sent to an island. We don't allow it to deal with any but the most immediate problems of the moment. All other inquiries are most sedulously discouraged. It's curious, he went on after a little pause, to read what people in the time of our Ford used to write about scientific progress. They seem to have imagined that it could be allowed to go on indefinitely, regardless of everything else. Knowledge was the highest good, truth the supreme value. All the rest was secondary and subordinate. True, ideas were beginning to change even then. Our Ford himself did a great deal to shift the emphasis from truth and beauty to comfort and happiness. Mass production demanded the shift. Universal happiness keeps the wheels steadily turning. Truth and be aughty can't. And of course, whenever the masses seized political power, then it was happiness rather than truth and beauty that mattered. Still, in spite of every tongue, unrestricted scientific research was still permitted. People still went on talking about truth and beauty as though they were the sovereign goods. Right up to the time of the 9 Years' War. That made them change their tune, all right. What's the point of truth or beauty or knowledge when the anthrax bombs are popping all around you? That was when science first began to be controlled after the 9 Years' War. People were ready to have even their appetites controlled then. Anything for a quiet life. We've gone on controlling ever since. It hasn't been very good for truth, of course, but it's been very good for happiness. One can't have something for nothing. Happiness has got to be paid for. You're paying for it, mister. Watson paying because you happen to be too much interested in beauty. I was too much interested in truth. I paid too. But you didn't go to an island, said the Savage, breaking a long silence. The controller smiled. That's how I paid. By choosing to serve happiness. Other people's, not mine. It's lucky," he added, after a pause, "that there are such a lot of islands in the world. I don't know what we should do without them. Put you all in the lethal chamber, I suppose. By the way, Mr. Watson, would you like a tropical climate? The Marquesas, for example, or Samoa, or something rather more bracing?" Helmholtz rose from his pneumatic chair. "I should like a thoroughly bad climate," he answered. "I believe one would write better if the climate were bad. If there were a lot of wind and storms, for example." The controller nodded his approbation. "I like your spirit, Mr. Watson. I like it very much indeed, as much as I officially disapprove of it." He smiled. "What about the Falkland Islands?" "Yes, I think that will do," Helmholtz answered. "And now, if you don't mind, I'll go and see how poor Bernard's getting on." As we leave Chapter 16, the Savage's defiance and the Controller's revelations leave us with more questions than answers. What does it mean to choose unhappiness in a world engineered for bliss? And how will the Savage's ideals fare against the unyielding machinery of this society? Chapter 17 promises to unravel these tensions further, so stay with us for the next reading. If this journey resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe to join us as we explore the depths of this story together.